some people outside of New Jersey think there's no spirit of liberty in New Jersey, but I find there is. Also want to acknowledge Murray Sabrin, a good friend of mine. He was here.
Can't hear you.
Which one? There, how about that? Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for this nice reception. But the whole thing is Mike just gave this speech. What am I going to do? You've already touched on the important issues. You know, foreign policy, economic liberty, personal liberty, and the Federal Reserve. That's great. So it is great. And you know, one of the reasons I've admired Mike so much is because of his background, his understanding of the military. Because too often, I'm sure he's been on the receiving end of it. If you're not anxious to go into any war any time, that for some reason you're against the troops, you're un-American, you know, it's pretty bad. It's pretty bad when you want to obey the Constitution, have a strong national defense, only go to war when necessary, then they say, oh, you don't support the troops. Oh, you are un-American. You're not patriotic.
You're the leader of the free world.
I think it's great because he certainly identifies and understands the military. But you know, something else has come out, not only in 2008, but in this campaign as well, that I think speaks in favor of what we're doing on foreign policy, is our campaign gets more money than all the other candidates. Momentarily, when they made those charges, I got to thinking, you know, well, what am I going to say about support for the troops? And then I got to thinking, oh, that's right. I was in the military once too, you know. And it was in the 60s. I was drafted in 1962, and I don't believe in the draft, let me tell you that. I was taken out of my medical training and went into the Air Force. And at that time, when I got off active duty and went into reserves, it was in 1965. 1965 was the year of the great escalation, a bad war going badly, and then what we did, we doubled the size of the war, and that was 65. And I can remember just getting off active duty and thinking, I don't want them to escalate that war. That makes no sense whatsoever. So I understand and identify with the military. What about the reservists? The people in the Guard units have been over 2 or 3 or 4 times, and they're tired of it. They're worn out. They don't see an end to it. Because it's an undeclared war, you don't see you don't have an end point for victory. But this was, going into Iraq was very, very annoying, and something I was very much involved in. And for a year or two before, we went in Iraq. And a long time before 9/11, they had decided to go into Iraq. 9/11 was the excuse to go into Iraq. But we had a debate in the International Affairs Committee. I'm on that committee. And it was to give the president just authority to do whatever he wanted. And I said, well, you can't do that. I said, he's going to go to war. You have to declare war up or down. So I said, I'm going to introduce a resolution, a declaration of war. I said, I'm not going to vote for it. So if you want to go to war, you ought to vote for it and be upfront, be more honest. Well, of course, we had a voice vote, and nobody was for going and making a declaration. So I said, I'm going to have a recorded vote. And that's when they really got angry. So we went through the recorded vote. Nobody voted for it. But one thing that they told me during this debate, which sort of stuck with me, they say, well, we know you're the expert on the Constitution, but that part of the Constitution is anachronistic. We don't follow that part anymore. But doesn't that tell you something about the problems we have and the place where we are now in our economy and everything else? Because the Constitution, if you can go to war without a declaration, you know, pretty soon they're going to be developing the Department of Education without a constitutional amendment. All these kind of things. They just take it for granted that they can do what they want, whether they're fighting the drug war, overseas war, or whatever. And little respect for the Constitution. But the Constitution is not overly rigid because we can amend it. Others say, and they've been taught for so long in our school system, that the Constitution has to be flexible and modern, and therefore it doesn't mean anything. The rule of law is important. What is written in the Constitution is important, and so we have drifted a long way from that. So we live in an age today where it's crucial. I mean, we're up against it. So many problems. The economics is the #1 problem, and the jobs. But, you know, I complain a whole lot about what's happening. Been doing it for a long time, trying to tell people there was a bubble and that we better watch out. We don't need to go to these wars. We need a sound monetary system. But, you know, the whole thing is if we'd only listen to our founders and understand what they were talking about and what we should do, we wouldn't have to be putting up with this. And yet we have been, and it's getting a lot worse. But I'll tell you where I get my encouragement, and I see a few here today, and they're young people.
Yes.
Every once in a while there'll be a few out there a little bit over 30, you know, and we do real well with the people under 30. And I said, well, if you're over 30 and you identify with what I'm saying, just say you're young too and you're under 30 as well. You know, the other day we stopped over at LSU in Louisiana, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and they said, well, we're going to have a little rally there on the campus. And they had to keep the people, the students from, and they were all students from the campus, and they had to close the doors after they got 1,250 in.
Yes.
And, there's a lot of enthusiasm on the campuses. So I do not worry about the long-term future of this country. The short-term future is a different story. What we do in this election, who we elect for president, what we do with our Congress, it's very important. But ultimately, the type of government we have in Washington is a reflection of the people. The people's attitude, what kind of government they want, is the kind that they get. I know most of us here are pretty unhappy with it, but the majority of the American people have tolerated this. Unfortunately, it's been the majority of the Republicans and the Democrats that have put up with so much, because the spending goes with either party. And yet, we're now at a point where it can't continue. Yes, there's been a lot of warnings by a lot more people than myself, but the debt is too big, the deficit is growing, the spending doesn't quit. They talk about cutting spending. They're not talking about it. Do you believe it when they think they're going to cut something? They say, well, we're going to cut, the super committee is supposed to cut $1.5 trillion out of the next 10 years proposed increases. The only thing that counts is this year's budget. But it's not strictly a budgetary problem. What we have is a philosophy of government problem. We need to change policy, and then government would shrink. We no longer should be, nor do we have a right to be, the policeman of the world, and that's why we need a local government. We would like to see it as local as possible. But we have another problem. The enemy, those who oppose us, not only do they like federal government, they like international government. And we're at the point now where we go to war under UN resolutions and NATO without even consultation with the Congress. I mean, that has to change. And that is the reason that we have to think about our rights, our personal rights. To me, individuals have rights and groups do not have rights.
Amen.
Groups do not have rights.
Corporations are not people.
Too often through our history, we punish people. Too often in our history, we punish people because they belong to a certain group, and that was wrong. But just as wrong is giving people special benefits and privileges because they belong to a group. But individuals are to have their rights in order to be protected, and there's still a lot of inconsistencies and a lot of injustices in our judicial system because we don't understand that. There is not a fair deal in most of our courts. It has to do with monetary thing and belonging to certain groups. But personal liberty is really the goal that we have to seek, because if we know and understand that our liberties don't come from our government, but that our liberties come from our Creator.
Amen.
That's right.
Amen.